Let me say good morning to everyone. Certainly, as we're getting assembled and assembling, it is my pleasure on behalf of course, the Bishop of Washington, as well as our Dean, to welcome everyone to the Washington National Cathedral. Certainly this morning we've set aside a particular time and place that we would be able to gather together as well as have an interfaith discussion around the poignant question, where do we go from here? We're thankful for Martin Luther King III and his family being with us. As we know, they have been in town and are here over these few days, marking that it has been 51 years since the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. We're wrestling with many of the problems that we were wrestling with 51 years ago. Yeah. We're talking about the progress that needs to be made. We're trying to figure out how we develop the kind of relationships that not just bring us what we might sometimes refer to as Band-Aid healing, but really being able to find the kind of solutions and healing that is transformative in the age in which we live. So we're thankful for each and everyone's presence this morning, thankful for the clergy and other leaders who are here, who are representative of many congregations, mosques, temples, and churches. We're thankful today for each and everyone who has gathered together, knowing that we do more together than we ever do by ourselves. Absolutely. And here at the Washington National Cathedral, we want to, of course, fulfill the unique role that we have and that we have embraced of being a convener and welcoming each and every one, that we may have what we sometimes even might refer to as difficult conversations. Many have referred to that in day and age like today as courageous conversations. But it's challenging to change. And so when we think of the violence that is around us, when we think of the racism and the prejudice that is still within the days today, it's not something that we should be talking about that we want to do. We should be referring, and of course, to conversations and looking at moments and saying this is something that we need to do. So this is a moment where we can take a step, not just through words, but we're hoping that relationships will be strengthened, relationships will be made, as well as when we leave this place, let me say in advance, we will have actions that we can do, whether that's individually or collectively, but one person can make a difference. So this morning, as we are welcoming each and every one and grateful to have everyone here, we're honored today as we have an opening prayer today. We're going to have that by Chief Avril Lookinghorse. Chief Avril Lookinghorse here at the age of 12 was given the enormous responsibility of becoming the 19th generation keeper of the sacred white buffalo calf pipe, the youngest in history. He has felt on many occasions overwhelmed by inheriting such a responsibility for the Lakota, Dakota, North Dakota, Nakota nations at such a young age. And so his life has revolved around his commitment to work towards religious freedom, cultural survival, and revival. And so today we welcome him to open us up, that we might consider opening ourselves up to all that is before us on this morning. We welcome you.
Gosh la wakaka apetukle eache wana wocheke apetukle gaga pikte nache makha sitomnia oyate na wochante tranka hecha you happy nache apetukle ona kele chakchu hinaje pyonka heche na wocheke chate wash agia na wocheke. Blessings and greetings, my relatives. It's the highest honor to be here today to do the opening ceremonies. And what I said today is that we as a people No, we lost a great leader 51 years ago, a warrior. And we're going to say our prayers. But I'd like to bring my wife up here. And her name is Paula. Black Hills woman.
Well, that was a surprise. I think he wants me to do a opening prayer song. With our ways, when we pray, we sing to the spirits and to Martin Luther King Jr. and his relatives. So if you would stand in an honor. And this is to honor the babies that are coming into this world, the young people.
Pettikile, Peche Wakantaka, and Pettikile, Loash de Loaka. Eche Chasha, Hechamakak de Shakoyan Pinka, Oyate na, Ewa Huala Chetaha, Naonshipi, Nachelate na Zanipite, Nachamakasi Dominia, Oleanashipinka, Natone Ponkiapi, no Chonkixiapi, Tonachakaki Japi, Yoksi Chapi, no Chonkixiapi. Na Pettikile Wakantaka, Chante wash Agia Kimani Pikte, Nashuat Nazani Pikte. Great Spirit, look upon us today as we stand here, as we gather. We come from the four directions. And we pray for the loved ones that have gone on before us. We ask the Great Spirit to help us and guard us the days to come. We think about all the leaders that gave their life because their leadership and their words would not be forgotten. we pray for all the people that have done us wrong. We pray that the people would stand and unite in prayer for peace and for healing. That the Great Spirit will make our hearts strong today and the days to come. Wajatu, ang particular na Holtzblatt ka, umitagos. Thank you.
Grateful to Chief Avril Lookinghorse and his wife for leading us and guiding us into this space. A space now where hopefully we will be more reflective as well as listening. And so we'd like to welcome this morning once again Martin Luther King III to the Washington National Cathedral. Many of you know that as he is here, and of course marking the 51 years since the assassination, this is also the 90th year of his father's birthday. And so we reflect upon time and space and the question of what we're doing with the space that we've been given. That we're grateful to welcome him because he's using the space that he has been given both locally, nationally, and internationally to make certain that we are talking about justice concerns as well as being engaged in trying to deal with the poverty that we see around us and the suffering that many of us deal with. So we're grateful for his presence and looking forward to hearing his remarks as well as the challenge on this day. Let us welcome Martin Luther King III.
Let me thank God for the opportunity to be back in Washington and to be here today at the National Cathedral with each of you. My wife and I and our daughter come to this very special period in a unique way every year because we constantly have to ask that question. Number one, where are we? And number two, where do we go from here? Amazingly, Dad's last book was entitled, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? Let me especially thank Chief Avril Lookinghorse for that amazing prayer, and also his wife Paula. When you think about how you start something, and today this is an interfaith discussion, interfaith leaders, it is beyond appropriate to have the beginning words by a First Nations or Native American or an Indian, representing all those categories. So, Chief, we cannot thank you enough, you and your wife, for being here. I also know you've taken part in other commemorations of Martin Luther King Jr.'s life and work over the years. I'm glad to see the spirituality of Native nations so well represented by you here this morning. More than ever, our world needs the spiritual wisdom and leadership of the Native nations of this hemisphere. To our moderator and our friend and brother, of course, to the National Cathedral leadership, but especially to Reverend Hamlin, who we've got to know over the last couple of years, a year or so now. Well, hadn't quite been a year, but it will be. But thank you, and the whole team that has worked to bring all of us here today. Every one of you could have been somewhere else this morning, but you've chosen to be here, and we thank God for that, to share in this experience. Let me also thank my fellow program participants, Dr. Keith Byrd, Rabbi Lauren Holtzblatt, Imam Tablan Sharif, and Dr. Paul Smith. I'm delighted to join you this morning and to be a part of this wonderful Interfaith Convening, marking the 90th birth year of my father, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I do appreciate that this program commemorates my father's 90th year instead of only marking the anniversary of his assassination. This helps us to focus more on his contributions and the meaning and lessons of his life. I also applaud the stated intention of this convening, which is to explore the joys and the challenges of interfaith collaboration, to build relationships and join in regional efforts to continue realizing my father's dream. I have participated in hundreds of observances and commemorations around my father's birthday. And it's been a quite amazing journey for me to spend time with so many people of all races, religions, and cultures who loved Martin Luther King Jr. and who continue to revere his legacy. Yet, though we commemorate the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday every year, with joyful gratitude for his life and the great reforms achieved under his leadership, we cannot yet celebrate his dream when so many millions of our sisters and brothers of all faiths are living with poverty, racism, and violence. Despite the great progress that has been made since the modern civil rights movement, we will commemorate my father's 90th birthday at a time of growing anxiety about America's future. As followers of Martin Luther King Jr., we are challenged to address a daunting series of crises, including the assault on the Affordable Care Act and the mass incarceration of refugee children. We also must address persistent poverty, gun violence, voter suppression, and widespread incidents of racially motivated violence and intimidation. Social media has made us all more aware of the continuing reality of racism in America and the world. Here in America, we frequently see news reports and Facebook videos of police abusing unarmed citizens with grossly excessive force. In addition to violence in law enforcement in recent years, we've become accustomed to reports of massacres, usually featuring semi-automatic weapons that should not be sold to civilians. Something is very wrong in our society when we have massacres even in our places of worship. A church in Charleston, a synagogue in Pittsburgh, a Muslim temple in New Zealand. African Americans have long understood that domestic terrorism is a more immediate threat to public safety in the U.S. than any other threats from abroad. And there will be other tragically mass shootings unless we can energize the movement for gun safety in the United States. Another area of growing concern for those who seek to fulfill the dream of Martin Luther King Jr. is achieving a just immigration policy. I fully understand that every nation needs to have secure borders. I get it. That there are legitimate national security concerns that must be a part of a sound immigration policy. But our refugees and immigration policies must also be humane, fair, and free from racial and religious discrimination. There's no room for building walls in Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream. Instead, he was about building bridges, bridges of trust and understanding, bridges of mutual respect and goodwill, bridges of hope and opportunity. And that's what we who believe in his dream must be about this day. And that is what we must do to create a greater future for our community. We must have zero tolerance for caging refugee children. I mean, think about that, caging children. Something that we would have never thought could happen in the United States of America. And separating them from their parents, and some may not ever find their parents, or for a long, long time may not. That should bother all of us, because we can do better. We must do better. We are a better nation than the behavior we're exhibiting. Now, I believe that strengthening the employment rights of America should also be a leading priority of all who seek to make the dream of Martin Luther King Jr. a reality. All we have to do is look around our cities to see that America is in urgent need of infrastructure upgrades and repairs. Every state has bridges and schools and all kinds of areas that need to be repaired from an infrastructural standpoint that can renew and revitalize the nation's infrastructure. And these jobs can provide decent wages, living standards for American workers. Nothing would do more to strengthen our country in the 21st century. Rebuilding America's infrastructure can help bridge the divisions between the haves and the have-nots with real opportunities for workers of all races. And so we really do face great challenges in this nation that we call home. My father often spoke about the need to create the beloved community in which people of every race, religion, and nation could live together in peace and harmony and work together for the common progress of humankind. We must embrace the belief that ultimately we are brothers and sisters. And really, in a real sense, one family. I believe, however, that we've been put here in this wealthiest of lands and most diverse of nations to build the beloved community and create a spirit of genuine brotherhood and sisterhood. And so we need to create a critical mass of active visionaries, people of all races, religions, and cultures, groups who not only believe that the dream of Martin Luther King Jr. is achievable, but who are also ready to work and sacrifice and suffer if necessary to make it a reality. None of us here today may live to see. Well, that may not be true. Some of us could see the beloved community, but some of us may not live to see. I really believe that. But the changes that we often are trying to make require great sacrifice and struggle for the benefit of future generations. All of these challenges provide an atmosphere, and it provides something for us really to think about. Because it really does only take a few good women and men to bring about change. Dad and his team showed us that. Mom and what she tried to do throughout her life showed us that. My father often talked about integration. And he said, like life, racial understanding is not something that we find, but something that we must create. The ability to work together, to understand each other, will not be found ready-made. It must be created by the fact of conflict. He went on to say, when I speak of integration, he said, I don't mean a romantic mixing of colors. I mean a real sharing of power and responsibility. In his view, America was not a melting pot, but a vibrant, inclusive mosaic of people of all races, religions, and ethnic groups. We need not deny our identities, he felt. Instead, we can weave them into a mutually supportive tapestry. He understood that equal rights can be legislated to a great extent, but genuine brotherhood cannot, because it comes from the heart. We must consciously work to build interracial trust and promote tolerance and respect for other cultures. There are laws that can regulate behavior, but none that can change attitudes. That is something we have to fix in our individual behavior by being open-minded, open-hearted, and courageous enough to reach out to people of different races and cultures. We have to make inclusiveness and spending time with people of other cultures different from our own a priority that we experience in our daily lives. Everybody can make this important contribution to fulfilling the dream. The primary reason my mother worked so hard to secure the enactment of the King holiday is that she knew it would lead to millions more people studying about the philosophy and methods of nonviolence. She believed, as did my father, that nonviolence is the most powerful tool available to oppressed people in their struggles for liberation. And so I am moved by your decision to honor my father's 90th birthday year, and by the outpouring of love and respect for his contributions and the sacrifices he made to make our country more just and democratic and humane. In this way, you affirm the values of love and nonviolence and the principles of justice and equality for people of all races, religions, and cultures. Let your dedication serve as a vibrant reminder of his legacy and our commitment to fulfill his dream. Martin Luther King Jr.'s life and work and teachings provide the closest thing we have to a roadmap to fulfillment of the American dream. But my father not only gave us a great dream for America, a vision of a nation united in justice, equality, brotherhood, and sisterhood, he told us and showed us how to achieve it. This is the legacy we must pass on to future generations. Nonviolence was the key to all of the victories of the modern American civil rights movement. For in less than 13 years, the nonviolent movement he led won landmark reforms, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The civil rights movement led by my father, Martin Luther King Jr., taught us that inclusiveness was not just a political goal, but also the way to bring a greater justice and unity to America. In his I Have a Dream speech, he challenged all of us to live together as sisters and brothers in the human family. On many occasions, he used the term the beloved community to describe the kind of diverse society in which every person was valued and where all conflicts could be reconciled peacefully in a spirit of goodwill and mutual benefit. It's not just about race. It's about bridging the divisions between the haves and the have-nots with real opportunities, regardless of their race. It's about creating more of that precious commodity we call hope, real hope. And it's about the elimination of barriers, physical and psychological, for all people with disabilities. It's about reaching out, not merely to punish those who've been convicted of crimes, but also to rehabilitate them and make them productive citizens who can contribute to the betterment of society. It's not about building walls, it's about building bridges, bridges of hope, goodwill, and greater understanding. Somehow, we the people have got to get the message to our top leaders that America deserves better than this. Certainly this destructive polarization. America deserves a functional democracy in which Our elected representatives negotiate in good faith and compromise more frequently for the common good. But it's also about making a place at the table, brotherhood and sisterhood, for undocumented workers, or otherwise all separated from their families. My father delivered his last Sunday morning sermon on Passion Sunday here at the National Cathedral on March 31st, 1968. Just 4 days before he was assassinated. His sermon on that day was entitled, Remaining Awake Through a Great Revolution. And it has been reprinted in numerous anthologies and studies by countless theological students worldwide in more than half a century that has passed since then. In that sermon, he addressed a triple revolution. The three revolutionaries or revolutions were the technology revolution, the weaponry, and human rights. And yes, those challenges are still very much on our minds some 51 years later. My father did have an inkling about the technology advances to come. And in the sermon, he actually referred prophetically to the coming advances in automation and cybernation, which have so powerfully transformed this world at an accelerated rate. In this age of the internet and cell phones and satellite communications, I think we have an unprecedented opportunity to mobilize the forces of peace and reconciliation in every nation. We can tap the power of the telecommunications revolution to build a global network of mutually supportive people dedicated to nonviolent action for peace and social justice. We must use the revolutionary technology to create a world in which our religious and ethnic differences are respected and valued as vital components of a beautiful mosaic. A mosaic that reveals the best in us all. Black and white, red and brown and yellow, Christian and Jew, Muslim and Buddhist, and Hindu and all other faiths and philosophies, East and West. We must travel together as sisters and brothers on a new road, a more hopeful and healing road, a road paved with respect for diversity and undergirded with love. A road reinforced with patience, chartered by the principles and practices of nonviolence and leading to world peace. With respect to weaponry, my dad noted the frightening advances in atomic and nuclear weapons of mass annihilation, which have reached terrifying proportions. Despite our best efforts to limit their spread and increase, of course, weapons of mass destruction like nuclear weapons, biological and chemical warfare still pose a daunting threat to every nation on earth. And we must elect peace-loving leaders who will work for disarmament. But my father could not foresee the equally terrifying spread of conventional weapons, including weapons of mass murder like the AR-15 being made available to sick and deranged individuals in our society with few restrictions. I am, however, encouraged by the awakening of young people in Florida and all throughout our nation as they organize movements for gun safety, including our own daughter, and domestic disarmament. May clergy of all faiths lend their wholehearted support to these brave young people as they seek to create a more peaceful society. Regarding the revolution in human rights, Dad was more optimistic, and he cited the freedom explosion that is taking place all over the world. But he cautioned that we still face enormous challenges in ridding our world of racism and other forms of bigotry. Sadly, that challenge still characterizes our times. I would love to see a global faith summit in which leaders of all faiths come together and agree to emphasize the central values of peace and love common to all religions. With that commitment, we can begin to lay the foundation for a global sisterhood and brotherhood that transcends all races, religions, nations, and cultures. For if we truly want to fulfill Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream, all of us must become outspoken advocates, not only of tolerance and the live and let live philosophy. We must also serve. Very important word. We must also serve our communities as champions of brotherhood and sisterhood. The kind that transcends race, religion, ethnicity, gender, age, or any of the demographic boundaries. With your support, we can turn this beautiful vision of hope and opportunity into a reality. We can create the kind of society that nurtures the bodies, minds, and spirits of all people. When Dad received the Nobel Prize in 1964, he said, "I have the audacity to believe that peoples everywhere can have 3 meals a day for their bodies, education and culture for their minds, and dignity, equality, and freedom for their spirits." This was his dream and his vision of the beloved community, not just for America, but for the entire world. Let this be our vision going forward, and as we strive to be better servants of God and humanity. Yes, these are lofty goals to be sure, but none of them are beyond our reach if we will make the commitment to reorder our priorities to serve human needs. We have to cultivate a certain kind of spirit in our hearts and minds and in our movements for social justice, freedom, and human rights. Without that spirit, we will never fulfill the dream. But with that spirit, we will make it become a reality. In fact, it's inevitable. Let us now embrace Martin Luther King Jr.'s challenge to hew out of a mountain of despair a stone of hope, and to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this spirit, we will sound the kennel for poverty, racism, and violence in our society. With this faith, we will lift our nation to a greater and more noble destiny. And with this commitment, we will see the dawning of a wondrous new era in hope and opportunity, shared prosperity, brotherhood, and sisterhood for America and the world. I say, we can make it happen. And now really is the time. Victor Hugo used to say, "There's nothing more powerful in all the world than an idea whose time has come." And in this time of division and separation and hatred and hostility, sometimes it feels as if God allows things to happen so that we can ultimately begin to address them. Because this period that we are in, this season right now, is a season that's perhaps we don't really know or didn't know. It seems like a strange land, as Dr. Barber stated last night, a strange time in our history. But one day it will just be a snapshot in our history. Why? Because women and men and children and people of every ethnic persuasion came together and said, we're not going to accept that. We are truly better than the behavior that we're exhibiting. Dad said, and I close, the ultimate measure of a human being is not where one stands in times of comfort and convenience, but where one stands in times of challenge and controversy. He went on to say that on some questions, cowardice asks, the question, is a position safe? Expediency asks the question, is a position politic? Vanity asks, is a position popular? But that something deep inside called conscience asks, is a position right? He went on to say that we must stand up sometimes for positions that are neither safe nor popular nor politic. But we must stand up because our consciences tell us they are right. Now is the time. Thank you, and God bless you.
We are grateful today to hear those words, as well as to be challenged and also to wrestle with our own conscience on this morning. We want to be able to move to our panel and be able to have questions that will be posed after we pose some questions directly to our panel from you who have gathered as well. So we just want you to prepare. And I'm grateful today that we could join in with these other faith leaders. And as I introduce them, ask them to come to the stage as well in order that we may be able to have our full panel assembled. But I'm grateful first to have and introduce Reverend Dr. Paul Smith. And as he comes on this morning, he has the wonderful experience, of course, of having known Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., of course, in working. And he comes to us and retiring from pastoring for many years in multicultural environments, and was a leading voice and shaper in the time in which he worked and served. And I'm grateful for his presence here today as he is still serving. Following, we are grateful to have on this morning Imam Talib Sharif. Grateful to have him share with us this morning, one of our leading voices here in the Washington community. And I'm grateful to have, of course, served with him through a few things throughout the years, but thankful as he is coming to share with us as well. And then we're thankful, of course, to have Rabbi Lauren Holtzblatt, who is coming to us as Rabbi from Adas, Israel, and one of the leading rabbis and voices in these days and times today. Thankful for her presence. As well as Reverend Dr. Keith Byrd, Sr., who is pastor of Zion Baptist Church here in Washington, D.C., but also serves as the second vice president of the Progressive National Baptist Convention, which is the Baptist convention of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and founded. And so I'm really humbled and grateful for their saying yes, their being present, and putting, as we would say sometimes, to stand in that spot where everyone else will be able, of course, to sometimes hear from others, and we wrestle with the thoughts that have been lifted up. I want to jump right in, make the most of the time that we have, and then turn it, of course, over to the questions that we have, but pose a few questions first. Certainly, as Martin Luther King has challenged us and raised some thoughts, he somewhat shifted one of the questions that I was going to start with. And I'd like to start first with that poignant question that he raised by saying, where are we now? And I would like to go one by one first, of course, asking you to resist the temptation of a sermon or a presentation. But that's a very big question, because I really would like you to address where are we now as you see it from your experience, perhaps your context, perhaps all that we're dealing with, that we may be able, as we talk about where we're going, really have a good sense of where we are now as we sit in these interfaith relationships as well. And I'd like to begin, Dr. Smith, if you could address that first, certainly because you're able to bring us from where we've been, as well as the years and your reflections. Where do you see us now in light of that?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you to my former student, and to let you know I knew your mother better than and more than I knew your dad, as you well know. I used to be vice president at Morehouse when he was a student. I'm old. So where I see us now, and we're in Lent in the Christian tradition, and so I've been working on forgiveness. I thought I understood what forgiveness was about, but I realized that I really didn't. I really didn't know. And the chief said something that made me again mindful of forgiveness. And he said something to the effect that forgive those who have harmed you. That's a tough assignment. And I recognize how difficult that is, but I also know it must be done. And so in the environment we are in now, I think that's the challenge, to forgive those who have harmed us. And if we can understand that, I think we do what your dad called us to.
Imam?
Yes, again, also I want to thank Martin Luther King III. Really appreciate those comments. It really has us to reflect on really, when we look at that, on where we are right now. And it's an honor to be here on this panel with our esteemed colleagues here. When I look at where we are, I don't want to focus on the 41 years. I want us to look at more so the 90 years of the gift. In our scripture, it says, God says, those who have passed in service to me, don't see them as dead. He said they live, though you might not perceive it from where you are. If we don't believe that Dr. King still lives, let's look at this son of his right here. Mm-hmm. Let's look at this granddaughter that's here. Let's look at so many others. And look at us being here discussing what we're discussing. 90 years. His life is bigger than the physical life. And if we look at the stage that he was on, the world now, we're under one roof. We're all in one house. And we have to respect the members in the family that's under the house. Mm. And that tells us how we go forward is with respect, honoring the life that every human being is created upon. He took us back. Our beloved Dr. King took us back to our original identity as human beings, coming from what most call Adam. When Adam was created, he didn't have a racial identity, didn't have an ethnic identity, didn't have a national identity. None of those things existed. But he had the most important identity, which was the first identity given to him by Almighty God who created him, and that was human. That was human. And from that first human, God said of him that he was excellent. So that means that all of us comes here upon the excellence that Almighty God put into every single human being. And I agree. It's not about building walls. It's about building better beings, human beings, upon the innate goodness that Almighty God put in every single one of us. Nelson Mandela said, no one is born hating. He said, hate is taught. He said, just as hate is taught, then so can love. And he said, love is easier because it's closer to human nature and closer to the human heart. Mm-hmm. And I'll conclude with this. When we look at that picture of the baby that comes here, we see Adam again. The baby doesn't come here conscious of itself as a race, a nationality, ethnicity. It comes here human, doing things that every single baby does. They smile the same, they love the same. And the parent, when that child comes here, regardless of that race, Almighty God put into nature that parent doesn't have to look outside of itself to feed the child. Almighty God, for every person, really the natural picture starts with the food being at a place right where a mother wants to hold a child near their heart. Yeah. Love. That tells us that to build better beings, human beings, we have to build that on love, concern, and care. Mm.
I want to say first, I'm grateful to be here. So grateful to be in the shadow of your family. What an amazing honor. I love talking after Imam Sharif because there's so much to add. Yes. So everything he said. Ditto. Right? Ditto. I've been thinking about this as we talk in our community about what the call is of this particular moment. I think different decades call on different religious teachings to be set forward and be the ones that are up front. And the one of our time, I would say, is ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha, which means that we have to love our neighbor as ourselves. That every time that certain leaders say that we need to hate, that we need to build walls, that we need to fear, I believe right now the call is that we have to eliminate moats, that we have to pull down walls, and we have to go forward in curiosity with love to find out who the other is, what they struggle with, how we can help and form alliances. In our community, we've been doing that through building alliances in the Washington interfaith community to work on fair housing, to work on gun violence, to work on better relationship between our police and our local communities so that they know each other better. And we've been boarding planes down to Brownsville, Texas, and to McAllen, and to visiting detention centers, and to standing with our brothers and sisters at mosques when there's violence. And so every time that we're told something is, someone is wrong, someone is foreign, someone is to be feared, I believe it's a religious call to walk closer to those people and to find out who they are. How do we build those alliances? How do we build a brotherhood and a sisterhood that actually looks like the beloved community rather than one built from fear, which is not how the original Adam was created. It was to love the earth and to love everything in it and to treat it with the dignity and respect by which God created it.
Good morning. Again, I want to say thank you to Dr. Hamlin and certainly to Martin Luther King III. We described, I won't tell all of our conversation, how giddy we were to just be in your presence. You and your daughter, you all represent royalty as far as we're concerned. Yes. We're honored to be on this platform with you. I could say ditto, 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 ditto as well. If I had to describe where I thought we were now 51 years removed or 90 years to celebrate the birth of Dr. King, I'd have to, in one word, say disorientation. I think that we are experiencing a level of disorientation, certainly that I have not experienced in my lifetime, and by that I mean the things, the truths that we hold dear as identifiers, as who we really are all confused and discombobulated because we have people on the largest level making what used to be held as right, wrong, or at least to the point where it's causing us to question. And I must be honest, even within our own faith communities. And so when you're disoriented, you tend to draw in rather than reach out. And I think, going back to what the rabbi said, we have to resist the temptation, even in the midst of disorientation, to withdraw and to stay engaged. And I think that's a plot. I think that's intentional. Everybody's now fighting for their own peace. And so we've forgotten that there's really one pie. And all of us have to learn how to share, or some of us, I dare say most of us, are going to be left out. And so I'm glad for conversations like this. It must be continuing. And whenever I think about Dr. King and what he represented, and here's the other part I'd like to throw out there, what he sacrificed. As part of his denominational home, I often think, here's an African-American male in the 60s who has a PhD, who comes from a prominent family. He could have lived well, written books, and 90 years, he could have been up here talking about the great things that could happen and could be, but he did not do that. He took a path least traveled. He realized that in order for a dream to be realized, somebody, somewhere, at some point, has got to sacrifice something. When we get back to that, then we can start seeing progress. But until we, the collective we, are willing to step out of our disorientation, to step out of our comfort zones, and have these conversations, which require some skin in the game, I don't think we can move the pendulum forward. And let me just say that I think that there are people on the other side, and I'm not demonizing anybody, I'm just saying what I'm saying, that are counting on the fact that we are too comfortable to step out and take the sacrifice. And so my thing is, as we commemorate Dr. King, the question really is, where are we? Where do we go? But who's willing to do what he did and put some skin in the game, facing the very essence of evil, knowing that it's going to come at a cost?
Yes. Certainly. I'm grateful for these responses to start us off. And I want to come back, as you have opened up through all of these responses, probably more discussion than we can have in this space. But as we have this space, what I'm hoping is that we make progress and continue to take one step for those of us who are listening as well. Martin Luther King, I'd like it, because you brought up while you were speaking as well, some practical thoughts and suggestions, even as you were talking about Global Summit, interfaith getting together. Could you expound a little bit on that, as I have a follow-up question for the rest? But what are some of the practical as you've seen it and moving around, thoughts that we should be considering?
Well, I think probably one of the greatest and most significant challenges, and this has all been alluded to by each panelist today to some degree. Dad used to say we must learn nonviolence or we may face non-existence. And that is really, we're at a critical juncture now. That's, to me, where we are. But I have a tremendous amount of hope because I haven't seen young people leading. In 1963, there were 3,000 kids who were arrested in Birmingham. In the Birmingham movement, they left school and they were arrested. And as a result, later on, the Civil Rights Act was signed. So, 50 plus years later, Parkland students experienced a tragedy. And that tragedy caused them to be engaged in an activism that I have not seen. Not following, waiting for us. Quite frankly, I knew our nation when at Newtown. I just knew I seen the 27 or 6 little children killed. Oh, we're going to do something about guns, finally. We're a great nation. And nothing happened. And so it wasn't until these young people said, we're not going to wait for our mothers and fathers. We're going to do something. And we are beginning to see the winds of change beginning to occur, only at the beginning. Now, my higher point is, and they're doing it in a nonviolent way. That's what's most important about it. The Parkland students, we all saw March for Our Lives. What I admired was they didn't say this is just about us and our tragedy. They reached out to young people in Los Angeles. They reached out to young people in Chicago. They reached out to young people in New York. And they brought this confluence, this coalition together of young, and they were exposed to the philosophy of nonviolence, quite frankly, by 2 young brothers out of Chicago who were doing it every day, but yet the media doesn't cover that. So you can't wait for the media to do something.
That's right.
What you got to do is we got to use the tools we have, which is social media, and elevate this movement. Now I'm saying that to say that globally, we have to teach and train people how to become nonviolent. We have to create a culture of nonviolence. We've embraced a culture of violence, and that's what we are seeing reflected throughout our nation and the world. And that culture will ultimately destroy us. But if we promote a culture of nonviolence, and that's, quite frankly, that's part of what we're we're going to be doing through realizing the dream for global peace. We're going to be creating the climate. You create the condition and the climate so that people will want to embrace nonviolence naturally. But you can't expect it to automatically happen. We want to develop a curriculum from K to 12. We have one from K to 6 now, but K to 12 that is presented to the entire school system so that you're teaching young people alternatives of how to resolve conflicts without reducing yourselves to violence. So those are some of the things we do. But it's not going to be us as realizing the dream. It's a whole collective.
Right.
Realizing the dream represents everybody. Everybody who wants to be involved, we welcome, because no one organization, no one church, no one mosque, no one temple, no one synagogue, nobody can do it alone. It is an entire collective. And what I'm seeing around the nation is people are ready. People want to hear a different message because, unfortunately, the message that comes from the top leadership is divisive, destructive, and restrictive. And so people want to hear a different voice. And we have to make sure those voices are heard because it's something called authenticity. That's what people are really looking for, an authentic voice.
That's right.
And while I'm not saying I can do that, what I can do is help create the coalition that creates the consciousness for more authenticity.
as we consider that, and you mentioned creating cultures, and so I want to pose a question and ask you all to jump in. But again, I'd like to start, Dr. Smith, by asking you, when we're talking about creating cultures, and we're talking about these environments of developing relationships, certainly you were leading in and are noted for creating culture where different cultures were worshiping together, coming together, and we still wrestle with, of course, Dr. King's statement about being the most segregated hour, even now. But even when we divide that up, even more along the lines, can you talk a little bit about what you were doing or were looking at that might have been helpful as you were serving, as well as what we should be looking at today? And then I'd like you to jump in as well, too, to talk about what you believe we should be doing and working with each other today.
Well, I said to Andy Young a couple of months ago that if I were not in my 20s, I probably wouldn't have been following him. You just have to be kind of crazy to do this kind of stuff. I'm serious. I looked around and said, I need to be home taking care of my children. Here I am marching in Selma. And so we did some things, but remember this. When you went to march with your dad or to do something, you had to take some time to do nonviolence training. Mm-hmm. You couldn't get off a plane, train, or bus and just go to the march. There had to be a preparation for that. And that preparation at that time, and there were other houses of worship, was church. You didn't go to the front lines. You went to church first. And you got centered. And you understood why you were there. You also understood that you might not make it. And that was real. And the other thing is, it's also very dangerous to talk about. You know, I'm in my fourth quarter now, so I can say whatever the hell I want to say.
Say it, Reverend. Say it.
Right. So it's about stories. When I was in Selma, I was in my early 30s. I was marching just before the Pettis, the bridge, and we got surrounded by a group of 20, 30 white people. And my co-pastor was Carl Dudley, who's deceased now, who's white. And, I had heard all the music, and I was ready to go. But then the guy spat in my face. So in a nanosecond, I saw my wife expecting our second child. In another nanosecond, I saw my rage. My rage, I would not be here because Andy had been in his nonviolence course in Savannah. I still wonder why I took that course, but once I saw this guy spit in my face, I realized why I was there. So there's a word that Howard Thurman gives for that. How can I be Paul Smith without making it difficult for Leonard Hamlin to be Leonard Hamlin? That's the challenge. And I'm very clear that I am a living witness to nonviolence. I am here today. And I think if you taught nonviolence as a required course in schools and colleges, we might be further along than we are now.
No question.
In response to that, our other three panelists.
We certainly appreciate that response. I'm gonna present 5 S's from what I've heard, and also something that I've taken from your father. But in the state of nature, if someone attacks me, in a state of nature, meaning that it's natural, if someone attacks me, then I'm gonna attack back. That's in the state of nature, and when it's personal. But when we look at the life of our dear Dr. King, what was happening was not natural. That's not normal. We talk about how human life comes here, and that's the state of nature for us. So that's not normal. So when things are not normal, and we are seeing things happening now that are not normal, and we can't accept it as being normal. But then you have to use this first S, which is strategy. Nonviolence was a strategy, and then from the strategy, we have to take a stand. You know, because we know he's one of those that said, if you don't stand for something, you fall for anything. So we have to take a stand. And then in taking a stand, what our dear Dr. Smith was just mentioning, you have to have what's called self-discipline, self-control. This person spit on it, but he knew. Because to respond personally, which was the natural response, takes us away from where we're trying to go, the mission. And we have to be focused on what we need to do to get where we need to go. So we have to have self-control. And the other thing we have to have is, our dear Rabbi mentioned earlier, we have to be willing to sacrifice.
Yeah.
And again, it's not just a personal sacrifice. That's sacrifice for something bigger.
Absolutely.
Not just ourselves.
Right.
Our dear Dr. King sacrificed for bigger.
Bigger.
And he represents the life of humanity, the life of all people. So it's not just a personal sacrifice. It's a sacrifice for something bigger than yourself. And then you have to be focused on his dear son, Martin Luther King III, mentioning earlier about service. It has to be about service. Almighty God lets us know that he created us to serve him. But he makes it very clear that he doesn't need anything. And there's a verse in the Quran when he says, I created you to serve me, he immediately says, I don't even need you to feed me. I don't need you to give me anything. So now we have to understand, what does that service mean? If he needs nothing, how do we serve the one that created us? It's by being of service to humanity, the best of human life. So we have to, in looking at this human family, not be distracted and let people separate us with walls of labels. But we have to build our life and stay focused on the human label and do what our dear Dr. King did. When he stood up and when he took a stand, he never stood alone. There was always others standing too. And we've started to see a movement of those who stand. Don't see ourselves separated, our different persuasions. We should never take a stand alone. Christian, Muslim, Jew, whatever case. We won't look at religious labels. We won't look at the ethnic labels. National. No, that stand that's come together upon that threatens human life. What we're seeing are threats to human life. Not to the label, but to the life.
I'm glad you're right there, Rabbi.
Come on.
I'm glad you're there, Rabbi.
That's not fair. I should have sat in a different order. You know what I'm saying? So yes, everything. All right. How can I add to that? First of all, I really want to say amen to everything that's been said. Everything. And discipline and learning nonviolence and learning how that works in the individual. I call it, for what we're doing, we call it mindfulness practice. What does it mean to actually sit with all the stuff we walk around with, the anger, the fear, the frustration, getting back to the fear. So I think fear plays again and again in the current state in which we live, what we're being told. I want to talk about past, present, and future. That's what I want to talk about. Past, I want to talk about what we call in the Jewish tradition zikaron. It's this idea of memory, of looking in our own traditions and finding the strands of teachings on love, on nonviolence, on humanity. That idea of Adam Harishon, the first human being that was fully that, a human being who could be connected to all other beings. And to go back to our traditions and find the places where our teachings give us values of how we want to face humanity in the world. How do we make this world godly? How do we show the godliness that is in the world and exists? So we go back. We go to our past. We go to our traditions. We go to our wisdom. And then we go to the present. And the present, I want to say, is both a mindfulness practice, right? It's the nonviolence. It's feeling in our skin, knowing who we are, grounding ourselves in those visions, and building alliances with where we are now. How do we go out into this world now and look into our neighborhoods, look into our faith traditions and find partners that are willing to walk this world with us so that we're not alone, and build a present that is rich with community that walks this with us. And I want to say future, because I want to give a little anecdote of something happened recently. So 2 weeks ago, I went with 9 other, my co-senior rabbi, Rabbi Aaron Alexander from Addis, and we went with 8 other congregants to Texas. And we went to meet with Sister Norma, who's set up Catholic Charities in McAllen, Texas. She's a hero. And she's been taking in hundreds and hundreds of undocumented folks that are coming across the border and claiming asylum and trying to treat them with dignity when they've really not been treated with dignity at the border and once they cross the border. And as we were on the plane, people asked us where we were going. Where are you headed? You going to see family? You going to see friends? And we said, no, we're going to see family and friends. We're going to see family and friends who are coming across the border and need to be seen with love, who need to be witnessed, who need people who have been settled here in this country safely to put themselves on the line and to say, I stand with my brothers and sisters who actually need to find safety here. And they said, you better be careful. You don't know what happens at that border. And I'll tell you, inside I was like, oh, I'm a little nervous. I have kids. Right. I want to be okay. I want to be safe, And the truth of it is, when we showed up, it was we showed up for people who want to be in America. They want to be in loving partnership. They want to work. They want to build families. They want to send their kids to school. They want to pray in safety. They want to build a dream. That's what they wanted. And you know what? Then we went to Brownsville and we walked across the border to Mexico. And what we found was a tent city of over 100 people that are sleeping in tents, waiting to cross the border to claim political asylum. Now that's illegal. You can't keep people from walking across the border to claim political asylum. But currently that has become a practice that is going on there. And so we met a family, 60 days they've been there with their son, waiting. They don't want to leave the border because they're afraid an opportunity is going to come and they're going to miss it. And so they sleep there at the border every night. And I was like, this right here in front of us, this is what we're being told to fear. And when we actually take a step forward, when we're actually saying, my place of safety and security, I'm willing to risk for this moment to see the humanity of another one, we get a vision of a future. We get a vision of what it might look like to build that brotherhood and sisterhood and to walk together in dignity, in love, in friendship, in partnership, to build and to uncover what is already here of God's holy word and to do it together. So past, present, future. Wow.
Ditto. I want to say this because I think it ties in with everything that we're saying, particularly what you just said, because I was going to kind of go in that direction, but you were so much more articulate, and I could have been on that. But let me just say this. We're celebrating Dr. King, and I think it's very important that we have this conversation. Oftentimes when we celebrate Dr. King, though, it is done in such a commercial way that he has made this huge abstract figure with no roots. And I think for us to really understand Dr. King and to celebrate him, we got to come back to the fact, if the King family doesn't mind me saying it, that Dr. King was a preacher of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. I feel obligated to say that because I represented his denomination home, 2 million progressive Baptists across the globe. Mm-hmm. He was a preacher first. Mm-hmm. And while he was very well read, very well studied, nonviolence from different places, Gandhi and others, it started with a fundamental understanding of the cornerstone of Christian faith, and that is love. Mm-hmm. So Jesus, a Jew, says, what's the greatest commandment? Love the Lord your God with all your mind, with all your heart, with all your soul. And the second is likened unto it, love thy neighbor as thyself. Jesus pressed through the Palestinian countryside trying to help people understand who are your neighbors. And then Dr. King comes here, his last public sermon, and says in this Rip Van Winkle sort of staying awake during a revolution, and he talks about technology as a revolution. He says technology has brought us together, has made us a neighborhood, but we still lack the moral consciousness to turn the neighborhood into a brotherhood. If we can just allow the love, which is the strand that connects every faith, regardless of what it is love. It is a love that comes from a common creator. That all people, listen, whether they are American or not, are created in the image of God. And we as a country who has a declaration of independence. It says we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, Dr. King talked about this a lot, are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, life, liberty. That is a people, a human thing. This country, what makes it special is not how big it is, how much money it has, how big its military is. What makes it special is that in its founding document, it submits itself to a higher being, a creator, a being of love. And how can a country of love be afraid, be fearful of loving other people? When we come back to that, then we can work together. That's right. That's right. We can work together. And the challenge we have now is that there are entities, powers at work that want me to be afraid of my Jewish brothers and sisters. Or I got to be afraid of my Muslim brothers and sisters. And so we all are afraid. Is that, talking from my tradition, is that, does fear overcome love? In what instance? Because if fear overcame love in this Lenten season that we're preparing ourselves for Resurrection Sunday, then what is it that takes Christ to the cross? It wasn't fear. It was love. And for me to be a Christian, that same love must be a part of my being and a part of my practice. So where does it come back to, Imam? Service. I can't even be a Christian. This is where I talk about disorientation, because Christians don't even know what it means to be Christian. I can't be a Christian and you don't eat and I'm eating. Where is the love in that?
I really think everyone can see why I was excited to get this crew together. And let me say in advance that what I'm hoping is that even beyond this, I'm looking for us to get together.
Absolutely.
Beyond this moment, as the cathedral continues to hold up and lift up some of our committee members and servants and all the role that we can help with making sure this conversation and what is being unearthed by your presence here today and stirring here today to help us locally, as regionally, as well as nationally, to be able to cover all of those in our conversation. We could go on and continue to do this. There's something exciting, and I can only say for me, about that old thing that I always heard growing up, when all of God's children get together.
That's it.
What a time. That wasn't meant for a party. That wasn't meant for a moment. It was meant for the overarching, of course, understanding that we have in this world that God has created and given us privilege and opportunity to take care of, to serve, and to love one another. As we have our program director here as well, too, we want to open up conversation or questions, because we could stay, I can continue to do this. And our program director, who I'm grateful is here today and has been really pointing me in all the right directions all day long in this. As you raise your hand, and we have hands here today, we want to give you opportunity for some time for our panelists as well.
In the name of Allah, the most merciful. It's so beautiful time for us. It's a so powerful session. The things you have brought at the podium and you have discussed, it can make a resolution for the whole world. A day before assassination of my King, Dr. King, my Dr. King, he said, when there is enough dark, star shines. I'm waiting for that moment when the stars will be shining. Trust on me that in many countries there's too dark. Communities are suffering. Faith people are suffering. Good people are suffering because of many reasons. And Dr. King had the solution. He had the vision. And I pray to God that we see his vision in practical shape in every country. Thank you very much. This is Dr. Zulfikar Kazmi. I'm Pakistani American living here from last 30 years. And I was inspired by my Dr. King.
Wow, very good.
He was my Dr. King.
Wow.
Thank you so much.
Good morning. It seems to be that there's an element of religious leaders that have remained silent on this issue of hypocrisy and the evilness that has taken over the dialogue and created this civil discourse. It seems to me that we need a letter from Birmingham moment where someone in the hierarchy of the clergy would remind other religious leaders of their calling. And that's, I'm not sure how do you do that in the global initiative, but it needs to be done.
You do know that the religious leaders have, I mean, they put ads in papers, denominations. They, Bishop Curry is among that group that's doing that. So those things are in fact being done. But to do, let me just be honest with you. I'm in the fourth quarter. I'm more frightened now than I was when I was in the movement. You know why? Because there are a lot of crazy people out there. And I'm just very practical. I don't want my family harmed. I didn't mind when I was, 40 years ago. But I have a family now. And I'm thinking about that because people are not rational. Someone said to me the other day that, we talk about 45 and all his antics and so forth. But we're just like him. How much more different are we than this idiot in the White House? Think about it. The anger that we bring to our jobs, to our families, to other people, we need to do some practice about how we do this mindfulness, how we treat our spouses, our children, and other people. That's in us. And I have to get in touch with that. And I'm telling you that when I was marching with your dad, I had no fear. I am fearful now because there are some crazy people out there. I'm not afraid to die. I just don't want to do it intentionally, let me put it that way.
Hi, I have a question, Mr. King, and I have benefited from hearing all of you. I'm here in D.C. I would consider myself a preacher of the gospel, an organizer, a hope proclaimer. I understand the gospel to be one that propels us to function outside of the four walls where we proclaim the message. And I'm going to tell you, April 4th came yesterday, and I said, today is the commemoration of the assassination. Today is also Maya Angelou's birthday. And God knows that I continue to rise. But the history, the people, microaggressions, macroaggressions continue to stomp me into the dust. And it is, I hear you when you say you have a family. I hear you when you say I'm going to the border and I'm thinking about my children. I hear you when you say, who is willing to sacrifice? I feel like I have sacrificed. And my family has sacrificed. And how much more sacrifice is necessary for voices to be heard?
Very powerful.
Is that a question or a comment? Which one is? Because none of us can say what enough is other than our own life experiences. What we do know, and again, as I said, I am so hopeful because while there are a lot of sacrifices going on consistently, I'm just very excited about these movements coming together. Now, one would argue that why are we going through this at this particular point? And why do we have a president who focuses on dividing? But yet, there's an undercurrent of people coming together like never before. And, you know, quite frankly, you know, for 8 years, many people who purport to be activists were sort of dormant, or at least not engaged enough. And you almost have to stay on, unfortunately, the battlefield all the time. It doesn't mean you can't take breaks. It's human. You have to take a break. You have to regenerate. You have to find a way to revive yourself. But we don't have a luxury. I mean, it really is about generations yet unborn. And you know, when I see what I wish that I could see is all of the many wonderful things that are going on in the world. I mean, if our news took a dramatic turn and decided, okay, we're going to report all the negative stuff, but we're going to purport 50% is going to be positive, we would slowly begin to change our society. The news is not going to do that, and I'm not going to expect them to. I don't think they're going to, but I think we have to. We've got to find ways to highlight all the good that is going on, because there's a lot of it. Yes, there's a lot of terrible things that are happening each and every day in every community in our nation and throughout our world. But there's so much good that we don't seem to know about. I was with an organization 2 days ago. It's called the We Organization, and they're a foundation out of Canada, and they teach young people to engage in social responsibility. And they're impacting millions of children all over the globe. And I mean, it's just when you're in that kind of positive environment, you're stimulated. And if you're down, all of a sudden you get energized. So somehow we got to find energy circles, energy spots, places where we can be regenerated, renewed, restored, and uplifted. And it's there. And I understand being tired, because God knows, you know, I'm older. Dr. Smith, not as old as Dr. Smith, but I'm catching up. But my point is, you know, I mean, I think about the fact that 50 years, 51 years seems to be a long time. In our human experience, it is a long time. You know, it's nothing to think about when you link centuries and centuries, life and all kinds of things. Creation has existed of some sort. So we've got to do the best that we can in our time for our season. And I just feel like there's a new energy that is coming. And I also think it's not something that is going to happen on its own, but we have to help create that climate. And that's part of what I feel our job is through realizing the dream for global peace, is to help bring in this new climate, this new season that will create the opportunity for all who want to be engaged, so that we can transform this nation, this world, and actually ultimately realize the dream that Dad shared for our nation and world.
I have a question. What, based on what you were just saying about more positive things.
And then I'd like to take a shot at what she said too.
What would happen if you heard nothing from 45? The networks just blocked them out.
That would be great.
What would the impact be?
The impact probably would be huge. I don't know how you do that. I mean, in other words, you know, I'm not sure how you censor. The Congress could vote to do it, but that's not going to change anything. I think that, as I said, at the end of the day, and quite frankly, this force could be elected again.
Yes.
That's real.
That's real.
So at the end of the day, and after, you know, some would say 8 years of damage, there's going to be so much consciousness created in our nation. The hope is that it doesn't go so far that any more craziness can occur. I mean, the frightening part is, you know, when you're a bully and you engage others in that way, at some point somebody's going to take you on. And that's what's dangerous to us and the world. So I don't know how you curtailed that, but it would be wonderful if that censoring would I don't see it happening because people want to hear. But I mean, you know, it really is. I mean, I give this example. When we looked and saw New Zealand, a small country. Now, New Zealand is a beautiful country. Tragedy occurred, and the head of state took action immediately. Yeah. And we call us a great country, and we can't do something. Yeah. We should be embarrassed. Yeah. Okay? That's totally unacceptable. Yeah. And instead of us talking about what that government did, that prime minister, we're talking about John McCain. Now, I don't have no problem with John McCain. Because in my mind, we're talking about the president talking about, and we don't have sense enough to realize that's a deflection. Exactly. That's what this man is masterful at creating deflections to keep you from focusing on what you need. It's a distraction. So I guess my point is, yes, we have to blame the press. They'll say, well, we have to cover it. It's what he said. No, you really don't. You could pick and choose, and then he would really have something to criticize you for. Exactly. But the fact of the matter is, you choose to cover superficial shallowness and distract and deflect and keep you on something that you shouldn't be on. So most of us should be challenging our leaders. Look, if New Zealand can do it in a very quick way, why can't we? Yeah. That's right. We say we are great, but we're not. Oh, okay.
Younger generation in terms of sacrifice. I think we have to stop looking at sacrifice as a way of dying and start looking at sacrifice as a way of living. I don't refer to this as the assassination of Dr. King because assassination gives power to the assassin. I refer to it as the martyrdom of Dr. King because martyrdom reminds us of the cause for which he died. We are to live for that cause. I could say more about it, but I said I'd do it in 30 seconds, and it's hard enough for a Baptist preacher to do that.
That's good. That'll preach. That's good. That'll preach.
That's good. I needed to hear that.
I would like to have the panel reflect on something here. As First Nations people, we always looked at other nations as another nation of Mother Earth. And I think one of the things that I, as a woman growing up in our culture, as we were growing up with the history and the colonialism and the ideologies that were imposed on us, and you kind of start thinking from your umbilical cord. And I always reflect on the umbilical cord because even Dr. King, through love, and each of you reflected on that about love, that's when you open up your umbilical cord. And I'm talking about connecting to your ancestors. I'm talking about, you know, he was a leader because somebody long time ago prayed for him to be a leader, that the reflection of who they are as a people would live and survive through all the things that different nations have gone through. And what I wanted to state is this: we look at nations of people as the colors of Mother Earth. And I don't mean to offend anybody, but for us, racism started when we start coloring ourselves. Racism started when we start saying we're black. You're not black. You're a color of Mother Earth in the darkest sense. We're not red. We're a dark color. You're not white. You're not albino unless there are real albinos. You're pink, beige, you know, whatever. And yellow, those things reflected on, you know, that when they looked at the Asian people, they were so humble, and then what it came out of it? Yellow-bellied. And so with us, we talk as nations, and that was a convenient way to be a melting pot, to say, you forget your culture, you forget your language, you forget where you came from, and then we're just going to paint you a color. And so with that reflection of how we walk through our culture and who we represent with our umbilical cord, with the many nations on Turtle Island that have lived here and passed on. And you're right, saying assassination. That's not a good way to say anybody has gone on to the spirit world, because we live on again. And you know, I've always felt that when my relatives passed, and I had an elder come up to me and they talked about Sitting Bull, and they said Sitting Bull came riding up to me on horseback and in my dream, and he said, "How are you?" And he said, "Oh, I have this going on, this poverty is going on, things are happening to my nation, and all this, woe is me." And he said, "I'm having a hard time." And Sitting Bull looked at him and said, "Yes, I've been there. I had a hard time." And he spun his horse around and he said, "But that's why I'm still living on." And he rode away.
So very early when you were speaking, Mr. King, you said that we have put children in cages, and that's not who we are. And I just wanted to acknowledge that in 1930, my mother was taken by a tramp steamer away from her family and put in residential schools. This is always who we are when we let the government dictate to our churches and our faith communities. And that's why this is so important, to knit together, to really call out government when we do what's convenient, which was for my mother and my mother's people, a cultural genocide. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
One more.
First, I want to thank you guys all for being here and sharing your wisdom with us. I just really had a question because me and my wife drove here from Brooklyn, and we're a community where Muslims and Jews live side by side, but we're even starting to see fractions and fissures there in New York, which is supposed to be the bastion of tolerance and freedom and liberalism. So my question is, how do activists like myself and others in the room fight back against 45, and the powers that be? Their megaphone is so much bigger than ours. I know we have to fight, but just how do we fight back against a megaphone and money that is that big and that powerful? Sometimes it seems daunting, and sometimes it makes me actually sit at night and question, why am I even doing this? But I know that I can't stop because they won't stop. So just how do we continue to do that?
Can I just shout really quick to that? We've got to change the orientation of our thinking. They do not have a bigger megaphone than you have. He's yelling from Washington, D.C. I know he has social media, but so do you. You live in the community. One of the things I keep telling our churches, which is why we have in Washington, D.C., with gentrification, all these churches, I mean, communities would much rather have a liquor store or this than have a church in their community. I'm talking about Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. And part of the reason is we haven't used what we have. See, if you become part of the fabric of that community, it's not so easily for you to be dismissed. But if all you're concerned about is your church, what you all are going to do, then the community loses value in you. And I think as a community organizer, you know that better than anything else. It starts from the ground up, not the top down.
I want to second that. I want to say we've been doing a bunch of things. Washington Interfaith Network, which is bringing churches and synagogues and mosques and other faith communities together to meet each other. The clergy meet so that we can get to know each other, and then we do convening and then we work on issues together, like fair housing, good jobs, things that are going to affect our communities. And so we feel both a fellowship between us and the power in grassroots organizing so that you don't feel so alone. The other thing I want to push is something that has risen up is something called One America, which is something we've gotten involved with, which is through something called Repair the World, which is out of New York. Awesome. So that's another place where we've been working with a mosque and also a Baptist church in West Virginia. Our politics are very different. And we will attend each other's services, which I'll say, sometimes is a little bit hard because sometimes things are being preached that are difficult to listen to, but then we get together to work on things that are common ground. So right now we're working on the opioid crisis. That's something we can come together on. So I think that is building the alliances and finding basically community organizations that are going to help faith communities build alliances so you don't feel so alone.
Yeah. I like to also ditto my colleagues here. Getting focused, if we focus on 45, then that in itself is a distraction.
Yeah.
So it's not that we wanted to defeat him or fight him, but it's the schemes that have divided humanity. And that's one of the biggest divides. And the next biggest divide is between rich and poor. It's not even racial. That's not even the biggest divide. But these are all schemes. So this is what we have to come together as a united humanity to fight the schemes of those individuals, not them personally.
I came here to be inspired, which I have been. And I just wanted to say that, you know, I wanted to have that spark, because you can't start the fire without the spark. Right. And so part of my question is, as just a regular person who's not a big part of big anything, is how do we, on our level, take our little spark, spread our spark, and create the fire of that passion to do what we know is right. And so I just wanted advice on that. I just have something quick I want to read to you, kind of because this is the way I feel about this, okay? Yeah. When you've been lost and can't be found, when you cry for help and there's no one around, you look around as best you might for any sign of hopeful light. When you've fallen down so low, the hole you're in is all you know. You become accustomed to the dark, anxiously waiting for the spark. Loneliness and anger stay close by your side, holding your hand while you hide, not wanting you to regain your sight, keeping you in perpetual night. Then over time there comes that day, the first almost imperceivable ray. The glimpse you thought you might never see is guiding you out, finally. Anger replaced with forgiveness, and loneliness with love, guidance delivered from heaven above. After crying so many tears and spending so many days lost in fear, believing we will never be free, the Lord opens our eyes to see that although we have lost, we still have life to live, that although we thought we had nothing left, we have so much more to give. He gives us courage to take step number 1 out of the darkness and into the sun, and lets us know it's okay to have happiness, it's okay to pray, and it's okay to let the anger leave and enjoy the light of day. He knows that we will falter and step back, that we will anguish and cry, but it is up to us to reach forward towards that spark and continue to try, because we, right here in this room, are the survivors. And we will continue to fight, and for the others who fall into the dark hole, we will become the light.
Okay, 2 more, here and then here.
So, as many of you know, my name is Yolanda, and I was just wondering, since the 2020 election is coming up soon, and with the president and all, how do we make sure that they will win in a fair way, the election in a fair way, instead of, now with the technology, people can cheat in different ways, and I was just wondering.
For those that don't know, of course, as you said, that's Yolanda King, the daughter of Martin and Mrs. King.
Well, you raised her right.
Yes.
So
that's wonderful.
First of all, thank you very much. Incredible. This has been such a good thing for my heart, listening to all of you. This is for the rabbi. You know, when I hear the thing, you know, at the border, it drives me crazy what's going on. Obviously, the wall's insane, and the demonization of our brothers and sisters from south of the border, it's all nuts. And it makes me sick and sad. But what is the solution down there? And that's what I don't quite understand. Like, is it let everybody in, or do we, I mean, that doesn't seem practical, or is it? Like, I don't quite, like, I have a hard time when I argue with the other side, like, answering that very question. Do you have more of an insight into this? Bring this.
Okay, so I'm not an expert on immigration policy, for sure not. I think one of the things that feels clear there are organizations that are working on this. The Texas Civil Rights Project is one that I think is an amazing place to look at. We need immigration reform. That's something that we need in this country, and we need a fair way for people to enter our country. We need we need a president that follows the Constitution and allows people to claim political asylum. How many people and let them through the border, and how we do this, that is for, I think, the immigration policy to figure out, for our legislators to figure out. But I do think for us as citizens, raising up the human indignity that's happening at the borders and the cages, the detention centers where we're holding people for 9, 10, 20 days in freezing cold conditions to wipe out disease, which is something that's happening now, and in San Diego, in El Paso, in McAllen. I think that's where we as citizens come up, is to say, this kind of behavior, even before we have comprehensive immigration reform, we won't stand for this. And that's where I think as citizens, continually raising that on our own social media, joining with organizations that are working on this at the border, that's where I think we come into play as people who say, even though we don't have the answers for exactly what the policy looks like, I certainly don't, but I do know that we have to stand for human dignity no matter, where that's happening.
And if I could just add to what the rabbi has, I just enjoy, I feel smarter just sitting next to you. If I can just add to what she's saying, whatever it is, and the answer is as complex as the problem, fear cannot be the basis of the policy. If you look back across our history as a nation, whenever we've made decisions where fear was the basis, we've always made the wrong decision. And that's what we have to lift our voices up to say, and that is a very good way to stump the other side.
Let me say, as we look at the moment and, of course, bringing this to a close, we acknowledge that there are probably many more questions that we could ask, and because of time that we're not able to get forward, but we're grateful for everyone raising, and perhaps once we're closed, you may be able to engage just a little bit more. I would like to thank, of course, Martin Luther King III first, and his sharing with us and coming this morning. And certainly to all of our panel, again, on behalf of the leadership of the Cathedral, we're grateful. And on behalf of everyone, including myself, thank you, as Dr. Smith said, for willing to be crazy to engage this work as we look to make progress and build relationships. Here we are again in this moment of time and space, where we don't have enough time, but we do have enough space. The issue is for us to get into the space now and go to work and not be ruled by time and clock. And so I hope that you've been encouraged here on this day, and to recognize that we're all living in that divine tension between how we will handle what's now and what is yet to be. And so as we live in that, I must confess, and I'm thankful for everyone on today, I struggle, certainly as it has been lifted at times, because what we all recognize, we're invested in the system that we live in. Yes, we are. I've got investments in it. I'm invested in it. What I always wrestle with is how much investment I'm putting in what God would have me to do. And so I hope today when you leave here, make an investment, not for clothes, not for just food on the table. You probably have enough that will last. Leave here today making an investment for the generations that are coming behind us. And so we thank you today, and thank you for coming.